Informing context, critical review video presentation. My practice explores our personal connection to land and how photography represents this relationship. My MA studies began with this image. In all its beauty and compositional conformity, there lies a disconnection between ourselves and the true nature of the landscape. The process of composing the image was an act of discrimination in which decisions were made to leave certain elements outside of the frame. What the viewer cannot see are thousands of people walking down from the car park towards the famous tourist destination Durdle Door. The selection and framing of things we choose to show the viewer and offer up for their consumption can clearly be seen in the popular tourist postcard. Within the confines of the frame, the landscape becomes idealized and ultimately helps to shape our understanding of place. Our preoccupation with the picturesque offers an escape for those embroiled in the artificiality of urbanized living, but, like some kind of unfortunate payoff, loses the landscape's true essence. As Wells puts it, we depict Britain as undisturbed and undisturbing, thus contributing to constructing a simplified and benign rural imaginary. Just prior to the invention of photography, painters such as Constable were creating representations of landscapes which are already distinctly photographic in nature. This shows an emerging desire to find a clearer method of communication, which photography later seems to offer. In Bates' book, Art Photography, he states that photographers and painters began to share an aesthetic of the imagination, that is, a common aim to invoke the perceptual impression of a scene, with the image as a view of a subjective instant, and how the pictorial image aims to render the real as an ideal. As the practice of photography evolves, issues around photographic truth emerge and challenge our understanding of the medium. There is a play between the real and the imaginary, which famously can be seen in the work and conflicting perspectives of Robinson and Emerson. Robinson was unafraid to manipulate his work, even going as far as combining multiple negatives into one image, whereas Emerson placed his focus upon camera technique. Both proposed practical approaches to how photography can be used more accurately to express meaning to the viewer. Although their differing views were never reconciled, the debate fueled people's interest in the medium and continues to inform critical theory today. In response to these challenges of how we represent landscapes, and in a similar way to photographer Paul Hill, I have learned to turn my attention to the land itself, not to hide from its everyday realities, but to search for the tracks and traces of human influence. I am learning to understand the land more deeply and listen to its story. It is also important to understand that although the photographer has the responsibility of representing the landscape effectively, it is also important to allow space for the viewer to create their own interpretation based on their personal understanding of photography. My images lead you on a journey, and their apparent uneventfulness elevates the topographical content into allegorical meaning. Walking and the sensory experience of place is fundamental to my approach. Richard Long's A Line Made by Walking shows how the act of walking creates an energy line across the surface of the earth. It presents a visual relationship between ourselves and land. I am in total agreement with Long when he states, it is the feeling for nature that is important, the relation between self and nature. His work also raises questions of authorship and places a certain responsibility upon the viewer to read or even translate the visual element into perceptual understanding. Long also takes what appears to be an animistic perspective by saying a stone is not merely a stone for land artists, it has its own essence, its own form and presence. In connection with this, my practice has been further influenced by photographers such as Brandt and his love for form and shape of the land and the pathways we create. In the same way as written poetry, his images evoke a deeper emotional connection between the landscape and the viewer. As Wells so eloquently states, Brandt's work aims to crystallize the emotional dimension of our relation to the land. It is these depths I wish to find and express in my photographs. Captured just before dawn, this image brings the viewer to a point of questioning. There are wheres, whys, when, and what fors left unanswered by the photographer. Ultimately, what does this image mean to you? What understanding does the path lead you towards? My image-making process is collaborative and explores ideas of authorship and deeper underlying narratives. During the collaboration and professional development module, discussions around Ewald's work really helped to shift my understanding of authorship and how I might approach my work differently. I began to share her view on photographic authorship. She states, gradually I saw that it was less interesting for me as an artist to frame the world wholly according to my own perceptions. I wanted instead to create situations in which I allowed others' perceptions to surface with my own. Similarly, the photographer Jem Southam has been influential to my practice in two ways, namely his commitment to returning to a place and working collaboratively with other people. In his work, The Painter's Pool, he takes influence from a fellow artist who constructed the pool and painted there. To some extent, we can also see that he is collaborating with the environment itself as it channels an ongoing visual dialogue with the photographer. I have conducted collaborative walks with a number of people who each have a deep connection to land. For example, during a 5.5 hour walk with Nigel Shaw, a musician, we explored his connection to the wild landscape of Dartmoor. The walk is captured through audio recordings of the conversation and images that respond to his personal landscape impressions. My sense of authorship is loosened and something of the walker and landscape revealed. For me, photography is both a window through which we look into landscapes and mirror our own experience. When an image is viewed, the surface of the print acts as a liminal border between place and time. I have committed to returning to Old Winchester Hill as often as I can to build a deeper relationship with this place. I have found that it is only through direct experience and time that it offers up its treasures. My work sees me moving between the sublime and the everyday. I shoot in solitude when the ordinary becomes extraordinary. As defined by Tate Modern, the sublime can be seen as something beyond comprehension and measurement. I work in the liminal hours between day and night and listen to the land. I seek the deep magic of place. In images such as John Martin's The Deluge, we clearly see the sublime power of nature upon man. Although I do not seek to represent his cataclysmic catastrophes, my images express the unseen and the seemingly unknowable, something beyond everyday perception and comprehension. Much of my inspiration has come from the artist Oscar van der Molen. In Van den Heuvel's review of her work, he shares Van der Molen will make a photograph at a place where she has reached a state of being in which the boundary between herself and her surroundings seem to blur. She does not separate herself from urban areas as a protest, but the fact that the places she seeks out are isolated helps her to achieve that state. She then makes her photograph, and the finished work she allows the character of the landscape to speak for itself as far as possible. My images seek to re-enchant our relationship with nature and act as a counter-movement against the blandscape of modern living. My experiences of walking in the dark, where vision becomes impaired and we fine-tune our perception to the feeling of a place, are effectively captured by the writer Rob McFarlane when he says, "Illusions are themselves means of knowing." For me, liminal perception illuminates the spirit world, and photography acts as an open doorway between this experience and the viewer. The question is, do you choose to step through? Van der Molen also uses video installation with sound in her practice, which, as the photograph moves into a film context, plays with concepts of time. This is an area that I will be further developing using the field recordings captured upon my walks. The physical presentation of my work is an area I intend to study in great detail. This has begun with the production of portfolio and display prints. In response to Van der Molen's approach and the more traditional painters of the sublime movement, I feel larger size prints may be effective. I will also experiment with the projection of images and use of audio recordings for my land immersion experiences to create a more sensory experience. Finally, the presentation of my collaborative walks will take a book format.